My name is Gabriella, 34 years old, an interior designer living in Portland. I had thought that this Thanksgiving morning would be a warm meal surrounded by my husband's family just like he promised. But when I woke up in a cold, silent house with no smell of food, no laughter, not even a hint of preparation, I knew something was very wrong. On the table was a crumpled note, hastily scribbled. Went to Florida with Rachel. My sister needs me. Stay and look after Dad, he's not doing well. Don't call. I'll be back Monday. I looked up and saw Walter, my father-in-law, standing at the kitchen doorway. Frail, trembling, but his eyes were clear. He stared directly at me and said, "Don't worry about me, Gabriella, worry about yourself. What would you do if the only person left in this strange house looked at you and said that? Leave a comment if you've ever been left behind when you needed someone the most. Hit like if you believe betrayal begins with the smallest lies. And if you want to know what made me turn one Thanksgiving into the unraveling of an entire family, subscribe. Because the story I'm about to tell might just change how you see the word family." I walked slowly into the kitchen, still holding the note as if rereading it might somehow make the words change. But the lines remained the same. Went to Florida with Rachel. My sister needs me. Stay and look after Dad, he's not doing well. Don't call. I'll be back Monday. No explanation. No phone call. Not even a clue that I would be abandoned alone on Thanksgiving. I opened the fridge. Empty. Just half a carton of expired milk and an unopened can of beer. No turkey. No mashed potatoes. No sign of a family holiday. Not even the fireplace had been turned on. I pulled out my phone and called Ethan. 3 calls, no answer. The text showed delivered but none were read. Out of habit, I tapped on Instagram and escape, a distraction. That's when the photo popped up right in front of me. Ethan, beaming on the deck of a cruise ship, his arm around a light brown-haired woman. Sparkling champagne in the 2 glasses they were clinking. The caption read, "Family first, number Thanksgiving cruise number Rachel and me, Rachel. His sister." A chill ran down my spine, not from the cold kitchen, but from that photo. From the look they gave each other. From the way their shoulders touched, too close, too familiar, with none of the restraint you'd expect between siblings. I turned around. Walter was still at the doorway, leaning on his old wooden cane. His eyes stayed on me, not with age or confusion, but as if studying, measuring every reaction. I thought Rachel was his sister. My voice was dry, and I felt foolish even saying it out loud. Walter let out a low, raspy laugh, part weary, part mocking. "Yeah, everyone thought that." I stared at him, not hiding my confusion. "You knew they used to be together?" He nodded and limped toward the dining table, easing himself slowly into a chair. "Rachel was Ethan's girlfriend. Before he married you. She's not family. Not even close. No blood relation to this household." I didn't know what to say. I remembered our wedding. Rachel had been introduced as a cousin from his father's side. I'd thought it strange since Ethan had never mentioned her much, but I didn't question it. Maybe because I loved him too much to be suspicious. "And how long have you known about them?" I asked, my voice nearly cracking. Walter looked at me for a long moment before answering. "From the start. Even before you 2 got married." I warned him. He just said, "She doesn't matter anymore, Dad." He always knew how to sound convincing. I sat across from him, my eyes still locked on the screen image of Ethan and Rachel. Why lie? Why pretend she's his sister? Walter exhaled, the deep creases in his forehead tightening. Because he knew people wouldn't accept him going back to her. Especially after what she did. Rachel ruined Ethan's first career. He left his architecture job to run off with her across Europe. She maxed out his credit cards, lived like a queen. When the money ran dry, she vanished. Then, once he got his life together with you, she came back. I clenched my fists beneath the table. So all those late work nights, the sudden business trips. It was all a lie. Walter nodded. "You're not the first person he's fooled, Gabriella. But you could be the last if you're willing to listen." I stared at him. "Listen to what?" He didn't answer right away. He pushed himself up with his cane and motioned for me to follow him into the living room. In the dim early morning light, he pointed to the fireplace where a picture frame had been placed face down. I picked it up and turned it over. It was our wedding photo. But the frame's corner was cracked. Behind the photo, a small tear ran through the back panel like someone had stabbed it and then tried to cover it up. Walter spoke quietly. I heard him on the phone 3 nights ago. He thought I was asleep. He told Rachel, once we get through the holiday, we'll transfer the deed and take what's left. She won't suspect a thing. My throat tightened. She was me. The house was Walter's, the father's home. And what's left? What did that mean? Money? Assets? Everything I had poured into this marriage for the past 3 years. Why are you telling me all this? I asked, trying to steady my voice. Walter turned toward the window. Because you're the only one left. And I don't want to die surrounded by people waiting for me to go, just to divide the bricks I leave behind. I don't have much time. But maybe we still have enough to do something about it. I looked at the man trembling in front of me, not just from age, but from carrying the weight of truth. For far too long. I didn't know exactly what I was walking into. But one thing was certain. I couldn't stay silent anymore. And I wouldn't let them get away with it. I stepped into Ethan's office feeling like I was invading forbidden ground in my own marriage. The room was spotless, polished, too neat, like no one had ever truly worked there. But I knew he'd spent hours locked inside, claiming he was on calls or managing tax files. I opened the first drawer. Pens, a handheld calculator, a few utility bills. Nothing suspicious. The second drawer was deeper. A few craft envelopes. I pulled them out, set them on the desk, and opened them one by one. Tax forms, life insurance policies, and I froze when I saw the name of the beneficiary. It wasn't mine. It was a name I had never seen before. Amanda R. Livingston. I flipped over the policy. The word spouse was printed in bold next to that name. My hands went cold as I opened the next file. And there it was. A marriage certificate from the state of Nevada. Ethan Collins and Amanda Rose Livingston. Married on February 4, 2015. I married Ethan in 2019. I had to sit down, clutching the folder to keep it from falling to the floor. If he had never divorced her, then our marriage wasn't even legal. I wasn't his wife. I was just the next piece in a long string of a man who knew how to manipulate trust. I grabbed my phone and opened our savings app, the one we were using to fund the interior design studio I'd been saving toward for nearly 8 years. Ethan had promised he'd cover the rest. Balance, $413.12. The bank statement showed it clearly. 3 days ago, the same day he left, Ethan had withdrawn $72,000 and transferred it to an account named Collins and Livingston LLC. I felt the blood drain from my face. I stood up, clutching the papers, and walked quickly out of the office. Walter was sitting on the uteen, old leather chair in the living room, a blanket draped over his legs, his eyes waiting for me to return. When I handed him the folder of papers, he just let out a long, heavy sigh like he'd already known. I guess you've found your own truth now, he said quietly. You knew? I asked, my voice shaking with anger. Not everything, he replied, eyes still on the documents. But enough to know Ethan didn't just lie to me, he lied to everyone. I sat down across from him, placing the folder on the table between us. Tell me everything. No more hiding. Walter looked at me for a long moment before slowly beginning. I used to be the deputy CFO of a tech firm in Seattle. 23 years. Saved every dollar, invested carefully, thought that when I retired, I'd have enough to care for my family, my late wife, and Ethan. After she passed, I moved to Portland to be closer to my son. I met Linda, Ethan's stepmother, at a charity event. Linda, the one Ethan always called the understanding mother? I asked. Walter gave a bitter smile. She knew how to play the part. But 2 years into our marriage, she started urging me to move houses, shift savings, sign a few documents for financial simplification. I believed her. I was a fool who trusted his wife. She got the house title switched to joint ownership, then quietly cut me out of most of my investment portfolio. Ethan knew. They worked together. Told me to sign a few things to optimize estate taxes. And 3 months later, I had no legal claim to the house I'd lived in for nearly 30 years. My chest tightened. And you didn't sue? You didn't fight back? I hired a lawyer once. But the evidence was thin, and the cost was too high. They did just enough to stay legal, just dirty enough to be unforgivable. I got tired. I just wanted to live out the rest of my life in peace. But they wouldn't even give you that, I said, trying to stay calm. Walter nodded. I know better than anyone what it feels like to be left behind. In your own home. To become a burden in the eyes of those who once called you family. I thought you'd turn out just like them. But now, I'm not so sure. I looked at this frail man betrayed by his own son. There was no pleading in his eyes, only weariness, and strangely a fragile hope that I might choose differently. I took a deep breath. I don't know what your plan is. But if you need someone in your corner now, I understand why. He gave a slow nod. I've already prepared some things. Documents. Evidence. A real will. But I don't have the strength to finish what I started. I clenched my hands. Then you're not finishing it alone. Walter stood up slowly, using the chair arm for support like he was preparing for something heavier than his body could bear. He motioned for me to follow. We walked down the hallway into his old bedroom, now used for storage. Dust hung in the air, lit dimly by the light from a small window. He knelt beside a 3-drawer wooden dresser, used a tiny key hidden behind a framed photo of Ethan's birth mother, and unlocked the bottom drawer. Inside was a long, dark wood box sealed with a twist latch. Walter opened it and pulled out stacks of carefully sorted papers in plastic sleeves, and an old voice recorder, its surface scratched but still lit up. I've kept these for over a year, he said, his hands trembling as he pushed the box toward me. I was going to take them to the grave. But now I think, if there's still time to do what's right, it has to start now. I sat on the floor and opened each document. Letters from lawyers sent to his old address, declining representation due to insufficient evidence of asset abuse. Cancelled medical bills, disrupted payments. Pages of bank statements showing hundreds of minor withdrawals from gas stations, restaurants, secondary credit cards, and Ethan's name but pulling from Walter's main account. I opened the USB drive tucked inside a yellow envelope and plugged it into the laptop. The audio played faint kitchen echoes and Ethan's voice, clear as day. He doesn't need that medication. $70 a pill? Let him cough for a few days. It's not like it'll change anything. A woman responded. I recognized her voice. It was Linda, Ethan's stepmother. As long as he lives long enough to finish signing over the house, we're fine. After that, who knows? I shivered. Not because of the cruelty in their words but because of the calm, ordinary way they said them. Like they were discussing changing a plumbing plan or switching Wi-Fi providers. Walter leaned back against the wall, his eyes staring far away, like he was used to hearing his own son talk about his death with such cold detachment. So what do you want me to do with this? I asked, my voice low as the anger surged through me. He turned to look at me, slowly choosing his words. I don't have the strength to take this to court. But you do. You have the clarity, the skills, and the reason to see it through. You want me to testify for you. I pressed. Not just testify, he said softly. I want you to be the one with full authority. If you help me finish this before I go, I'll make sure you never have to depend on anyone again. No one will take from you what Ethan stole. I stood pacing the room, my mind in a storm. Part of me wanted to say yes instantly to get revenge, to reclaim what was mine. Not just the money but my dignity, my time, my trust. But another part of me, the shaky, still wounded part, doubted. I'm not a lawyer, I whispered. I'm not a fighter. I'm just a woman who just realized she was never really a wife. Walter nodded. And I'm just an old man who just realized he never really had a son. That sentence so light, yet it hit like a punch to the chest. I couldn't answer him in that moment. I needed air. I stepped into the hallway and called my mom. I needed a familiar voice. I needed to borrow Dad's old car to get back to Portland. I needed a few days to think. The phone rang 3 times before someone picked up. But it wasn't my mom. It was Ethan. I froze, lips dry, unable to blink. Oh Gab, he said, light as ever, like we just missed each other at a bar. Hey, I'm borrowing your dad's car, all right? Tell him I've got some errands in Tampa. I'll fill the tank. Oh, and don't bother Rachel. She's feeling under the weather. I didn't say a word. Just ended the call and stared at the black screen. No one in my family knew what was really happening. Ethan had already been there, manipulating everyone, borrowing my father's car like he still belonged in our lives. Like he hadn't betrayed me. Lied. Abandoned me with a dying man like I was some kind of babysitter for a burden. I walked slowly back into the room where Walter still sat in silence. "Do you have a pen?" I asked. He nodded and pulled an old Mont Blanc from his pocket, his name barely visible after all these years. I sat beside the low table, opened the folder, and began to write. Not for him. Not for revenge. But because I finally understood if I didn't stand up now, I'd spend the rest of my life being stepped on by people who know how to smile while robbing you blind. I found Marianne's number in an old medical report Walter had kept in a thick folder at the bottom of a box. She was the nurse who took care of him during his recovery after heart surgery a year and a half ago. But Linda had let her go, citing personality mismatch. Walter called it what it really was. Fired for knowing too much. I called Marianne the next morning. Her voice came through the phone clearly, fast, sharp, and alert. When I introduced myself and said Walter needed help, she paused for a few seconds, then replied, "I can be there in 3 hours. Do you have discreet parking?" Exactly 3 hours later, an old forest green SUV pulled up at the gate. Marianne stepped out with unapologetic confidence. She looked to be in her early 50s, her wavy hair tied up, wearing a light brown trench coat, and carrying 2 large canvas bags. Walter gave a faint smile when he saw her. "Still like showing up unannounced, huh? And you still sound like 3 packs of cigarettes a day," Marianne shot back, then walked into the house like she'd never been dismissed. We gathered in the living room. I told her everything from discovering Ethan's disappearance, to finding the old marriage files, and finally Walter's proposition. Marianne nodded along, never interrupting, but her eyes were as sharp as a scalpel. "So what's the plan?" she asked at last. "To paint a complete picture of an end-of-life patient abandoned and neglected," I replied. "No fabrications. Just accelerating the truth they've tried to bury." Marianne opened one of the canvas bags. Inside was nearly a full medical setup, a portable oxygen tank, IV tubing, syringes without needles, nasal cannula, and empty prescription bottles that looked real but were inactive. "I pulled this from a discharged patient file. That one's from a public health supply reserve," she explained while laying everything out on the table, inspecting each item. "No one will question it if everything is placed just right." Walter watched closely, his eyes strangely bright. "If I didn't know you studied stage design before nursing, I'd wonder where your sense of aesthetic came from. And if I didn't know you funded my scholarship program, I wouldn't be here," Marianne answered without a smile. That entire day we transformed Walter's bedroom into something that resembled a hospice care suite. We moved the bed closer to the window for natural light. Marianne set up the oxygen tank by the headboard and ran the tubing to the pillow. An old heart rate monitor with a blinking light went on the shelf. I labeled the empty medication bottles, wrote out dosage notes, and scattered them just enough on the nightstand to avoid suspicion. Marianne handed me a thick folder and empty medical log. "Start recording fabricated vitals. Can you handle that?" I nodded. I used to create mock patient profiles for a private hospital chain's ad campaign. I know how to make it look as real as possible. We divided the tasks clearly. Walter would lie in bed for several hours each day, wearing oxygen, showing natural signs of fatigue. I would document his symptoms in the log: times, temperatures, blood pressure, medication reactions. Marianne provided samples from Walter's old records so everything stayed consistent. In the afternoon, I took photos of Walter from multiple angles, eyes closed, lying on his side, with me taking his vitals. I adjusted the lighting so the shadows exaggerated his hollow cheeks, pale skin, and sunken eyes. Marianne guided me on where to place the IV bag in the frame, just visible enough, but not obvious. "Look here, don't smile, and don't overdo the weakness," I reminded Walter as I took a photo of him sitting with his pill tray. "Hard to fake being weak when you already are," he muttered, but cooperated strangely well. That evening, after Marianne had left and the house went quiet again, I sat alone at the laptop, organizing all the files: medical logs, photos, audio clips, medication lists. I created a password-protected folder, backed it up to an external hard drive, and printed a hard copy to store in a locked drawer. Walter appeared behind me, holding a glass of water. Funny, isn't it? I have to pretend I'm dying just to convince people I'm alive. I turned to him, my chest tightening. You're not pretending to die, Walter. You're just showing them the ending they've willfully ignored. He sat beside me. How long do you think we can keep this going? Until Monday, I said. They said they'd be back on Monday. I need everything perfect before they walk through that door. Walter nodded slowly. You know, Gabriella, I never thought anyone would stand by me again. But now, for the first time in years, I don't feel alone. I looked at him in the dim desk lamp glow and saw a rare kind of calm. Not the kind that comes from hope for survival but from finally being heard. I rested my hand on the newly saved hard drive. We'll make them listen, whatever it takes. I woke up early the next morning, the sky still gray beyond the foggy window. In the kitchen, the sound of boiling water filled the silence like a taut string. I made a cup of tea, grabbed my notebook, opened my phone, and switched on the voice recorder before placing a call. The first number I dialed was Ethan's. I took a deep breath, then let my voice tremble just slightly like a woman panicked but trying to stay composed. Ethan, it's me. The doctor said his condition is unstable. His temperature spiked this morning, oxygen dropped below the safety threshold. They said, we should prepare ourselves. Can you call me back? I really need you here. I paused for a few seconds, just enough to let the emotion hang, then ended the call. Less than 4 minutes later, my phone rang. Not Ethan's number but an unknown one. I picked up. Gab? It's me. Using the hotel phone, my other phone's charging, Ethan's voice came through, calm and casual. I heard your message. What did the doctor say again? I spoke slowly, each word like a weight. He had trouble breathing all night. Temperature's unstable. If you want to talk to him, wait. Ethan cut in, a hint of irritation creeping in. You mean, will he make it to Monday? We're still on schedule. You just need to keep things steady until we get there. I paused. I just thought, if he died before you came back, would you feel any regret? Someone said something in the background. It was Rachel's voice. Ethan sighed. Look, you've got to understand. This trip was planned for a month. Rachel's been stressed from work, Mom needed a break. You've done great so far. Just keep him stable until Monday, then we're done. I hung up without another word. The call lasted under 2 minutes, but the silence it left behind froze the entire kitchen. I opened the recorder and saved the file under the name, Ethan. Keep him alive until Monday. The second call I made was to Rachel. She picked up almost immediately, her voice cheerful like she was lounging by a pool. Gabriella. Everything okay? Ethan said you called. I didn't waste time. Walter's deteriorating. If you want to see him one last time, you might want to reconsider coming back early. There was a short pause. Then Rachel lowered her voice. Right. Well, do you think he'll still be able to sign the documents before anything happens? What documents? I asked, though I already knew. The house stuff. Ethan said he was planning to update the ownership records, Rachel said quickly. I'm just asking to make sure everything's legally clear. You understand, right? All I understand is that he's fighting for every breath alone, and you're asking about signatures, I replied, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. Rachel went silent, then hung up without saying another word. I saved the recording and titled it, Rachel, Signature Before Death. Lastly, I called Linda, Ethan's stepmother. She picked up after the 5th ring. What is it, calling at this hour, Gabriella? Can't you see I'm trying to rest? I tried to keep my voice calm, free of any sarcasm. Walter's in critical condition. I thought you should know. How old is he now? Linda replied, as if she were talking about an old appliance about to break down. 78, well then, it's not surprising. He's old, it's his time. Don't you want to know any details? I asked, unable to hide the disappointment. I just want to know if I need to send money for more meds. But don't buy anything expensive, all right? Basic stuff is fine. He doesn't need much at the end anyway. I clenched my fingers around the phone. Anything else? Linda asked, her tone growing impatient. No, that's enough, I said, then hung up. I saved the recording under the file name. Linda, cheap meds only. I didn't know how long I sat in that kitchen chair, the cup of tea beside me cold to the touch. My emotions tangled anger, hurt, and a dull ache that came from being treated like a caretaker instead of family. But more than anything, something had never been clearer. I had nothing left to hold on to with these people. Walter walked into the kitchen and saw my face. What did they say? I simply handed him the phone, playing each of the recordings. He said nothing as he listened. But I saw his eyes turn red, the lines on his forehead sinking like fresh invisible wounds. I thought I was used to this, he said quietly when the last clip ended. Turns out, you can still hurt again. I gently held his hand. These are the receipts. And their farewell, no tears, just calculations. Walter nodded. Then it's time we write the ending. On our terms. That morning, as I carefully recorded Walter's fabricated vitals into his medical log, the doorbell rang. I looked up, still mid-sentence, when Walter's voice called from the bedroom. Go ahead and open it, it's probably Mrs. Patterson. I went to the door. Standing before me was a woman around 70, petite but spry, her silver hair neatly tied back. She wore a thick gray sweater and held a basket of cookies wrapped in parchment paper. You must be Gabriella, she said with a soft smile, curiosity twinkling in her eyes. I'm Edith Patterson. I've lived across from this house for over 15 years. I saw your car parked here since Thanksgiving and thought maybe Mr. Walter could use a hand. I invited her in, grateful for the kindness. In the living room, Walter heard her voice and called out, Edith, haven't you gotten tired of me yet? Not even close, she replied, placing the basket on the table like she'd done it 100 times. I heard you had a fever last night. Feeling any better today? Walter gave a faint nod, enough to acknowledge without fuss. Edith turned to me, her face growing serious. Just so you know, she began, I saw Ethan leaving this house recently, holding a stack of papers. He didn't look at me, just rushed to his car. But what really worried me was the time Mr. Walter fell in the backyard last month. I saw it happen. Ethan pushed him. It was clear as day. But the next morning, Linda came over, handed me a thick envelope, and said it was to thank me for fixing the fence for Mr. Walter. I froze. And you didn't tell anyone? I kept that envelope the whole time, never opened it, Edith said, pulling a worn, yellowed envelope from her coat pocket. I don't take hush money. But I do want to know how this ends. I accepted the envelope, knowing it was a critical piece of the story we were slowly piecing together. Before she left, Edith added, if you need a witness, I'm willing to speak. I've seen enough things Ethan and Linda would rather keep buried. That afternoon, she returned with her husband Harold, a tall man with slow steps and sharp eyes. He carried an old leather-bound notebook, its corners frayed with time. If you need anything from us, just ask, Harold said as he sat down. I used to be a cop. My instincts tell me Mr. Walter's been taken advantage of for years. I gave a quick rundown of everything happening. It didn't take much. In a few minutes, both of them understood the gravity of the situation. Harold nodded, then opened the notebook. I kept pretty detailed notes every time I saw something off. Like, 2 months ago, I watched Ethan sneak a small safe out of Mr. Walter's garage. And the week before Thanksgiving, Linda carried out several large bags from the house. The way she looked around before loading them into her car. I knew something wasn't right. I took notes, never taking my eyes off the details Harold shared. Walter sat quietly in the chair near the window, never interrupting, only nodding slowly as if confirming each event. Before they left, Harold handed me the notebook. Hold on to this. If this ever ends up in court, you'll need consistent evidence. And I'll testify if needed. Just when I thought we had all the testimony we could gather, a message came through later that evening from an unknown number. I'm Angela, used to be a nurse for Mr. Walter. I need to meet you. We agreed to meet at a small cafe down the street the following morning. Angela arrived on time, wearing a light white jacket, her face pale but her gaze unwavering. I can't stay quiet anymore, she said as soon as she sat down. Back then, I came twice a week to care for Mr. Walter, per Linda's request. But after 3 weeks, my contract was suddenly terminated. And I know why. Angela pulled a handwritten letter from her coat pocket, signed and dated, along with a copy of the medication schedule and dosage prescriptions. She slid them across the table. Linda told me to reduce the morphine dose from 15 milligrams down to 5 per session. She claimed he was misusing medication, but I never saw signs of that. I reported it to the agency, but before they could act, my contract was pulled. I read the letter, each line neatly written, the signature and date clearly marked. Another piece of evidence, this one from a licensed professional. Angela lowered her voice. I couldn't just watch an elderly man be denied medication just because someone wanted to save a few $100. If you need a witness, I'll testify before the medical board. I gently placed my hand over hers. Thank you. What you're doing will change everything. When I returned home, I placed all the documents into the encrypted folder, then printed a backup copy, sealed it in a thick envelope, and labeled it, Community Witnesses, Group A. Walter met me at the door, his eyes glistening when he saw the thick stack of papers in my arms. What do we have now? He asked. We've got neighbors. A retired cop. A nurse. And me, I replied. Walter said nothing. He simply opened the door wider, then silently placed a hand on my shoulder, a wordless thank you. In that moment, I knew the ones who had been silenced finally had a voice. That day, a soft rain fell, the streaks trailing down the window like they carried away our pain. After a simple dinner, Walter motioned for me to follow him into his old office, the one that had sat untouched for years until I'd cleared it out just days ago. He opened the bookshelf, his hand reaching the bottom row before gently sliding one of the wooden panels backward. A soft click echoed, and I saw a long metal box slide out from behind a false wall. The smell of old paper and rotting wood blended together, but what lay inside was far from decayed. Walter placed the box on the table and opened the lid. Inside were documents meticulously organized, each bundle sealed in moisture-resistant plastic sleeves. He flipped through them, eyes never leaving the printed lines. See the red folder? He pointed. That's the ownership paperwork for a house I bought in Vermont. I never told anyone. It's under a limited liability company, Elmside Holdings. No one knows I'm behind it, not even Ethan. I gently turned the pages. The property was valued at over $850,000, mortgage-free, tax-clear. Everything was spotless. And this, Walter continued, sliding a cream-colored folder toward me, is my old ranch in Utah. A college friend's been holding the papers for me. I haven't been back in years, but I've kept the taxes up. Over 20 acres, its own water source, a small log cabin. I once thought I'd retire there. I swallowed hard. You had everything, but lived like you had nothing. Walter gave a soft laugh, his gaze drifting to a corner of the room like he was speaking to himself. When you live with people you no longer trust, assets become burdens. I used to think keeping everything quiet would preserve the family. But eventually I realized, what I was holding on to was exactly what made them crueler. He pushed over a third folder, thinner but weightier in meaning. A statement from a foreign bank account, showing a balance of more than $1.7 million. Held under an offshore company, opened a decade ago, completely disconnected from domestic accounts. This is the only part I've managed to keep untouched, he said quietly. Ethan and Linda don't know it exists. But, if I die without clarifying things, they'll find a way to dig it up. And use the law to overturn the will. I looked at him, feeling the weight of a man who had spent a lifetime calculating, only to be cornered by those closest to him. As of now, he said slowly, in the old will, the primary heir is still Ethan. And Linda's named as co-executor. I couldn't hide my shock. Why didn't you cancel it sooner? Walter shook his head. I tried. But every time the lawyer scheduled a visit, either I got sick or Linda came up with some excuse. It kept getting delayed until I realized. They weren't waiting for me to change the will. They were waiting for me to die. I clutched the folder tighter. It's not too late. We still have time. Walter nodded. I've called my private attorney Judith Harris. She's an old contact but loyal. She'll be here soon to witness me signing the new will, with you and the neighbors as witnesses. I exhaled a long breath, relieved after days of wrestling with helplessness and fury. He stood, pulled a stack of papers wrapped in dark parchment from the drawer. I also wrote a letter not to blame, but to explain why I changed my decision. I don't want them thinking I acted out of anger. They need to understand that I'm disappointed not because they're bad, but because they never chose to live decently. I accepted the envelope. His handwriting was no longer steady, but it was clear. Each line was a restrained ache. In the letter, Walter never called Ethan my son, just his name. He mentioned the missed calls, the lonely holiday meals, the treatments endured alone. He recalled the scarf Rachel once brought home as a gift, tag still on, straight from the clearance bin. He wrote, "I never hoped to be loved like some frail old man. I only wished to be treated like a human being." I laid my hand on the letter, feeling something stir deep in my chest. Not from the injustice he endured, but from a quiet fear that one day, I too might end up in that place. Forgotten. Treated like a shadow. Walter turned to me. "If I don't make it until they return, make sure they read this letter before they open their mouths. Don't let anyone twist the truth." I nodded, without hesitation. "I will. And I'll do it right." He smiled softly, then took my hand, thin, dry, but still warm. "I'm not writing this will to get revenge. I'm doing it to preserve what's still decent in my life, before it gets stripped away completely." We sat in that small room for a long time, saying nothing more. Rain kept falling outside the porch, like a thin veil quietly washing away the past, preparing us for something very near. It took me nearly 15 minutes to help Walter into his coat, wrap a scarf around him, and settle him firmly into the wheelchair. The air had turned sharply cold that morning. The dampness made each of his steps slower, more strained, but his eyes were unusually bright. There was something in the way he stayed silent as the wheels rolled that kept me from asking anything further. We went straight to the private bank where Walter had maintained his main account for nearly 30 years. As I pushed open the door with him, the receptionist recognized Walter immediately. "Mr. Harmon? It's so good to see you again. The branch manager was just asking about you this morning." Then she turned to me. "But Ethan Collins was here earlier today, brought in an old power of attorney and requested to withdraw the entire balance from the main account." I froze. My hand gripping the wheelchair handles went stiff. Walter simply smiled, not at all surprised. "I guess we didn't make it in time. Good thing the account hasn't been touched yet." Branch manager Richard Lane, a dignified man in his 60s, stepped out from his office, his face lighting up when he saw Walter. "Walter," my assistant said, "you were here. I thought it was a mistake. It's really you. Still holding up okay?" He shook Walter's hand gently, as if afraid of hurting him. "I need to speak to you directly. About the beneficiary on my account," Walter said firmly, then turned to me. "Gabriella, come with me." We were ushered into a private office, the door closing softly behind us. Richard opened his computer, typed a few commands, then turned the monitor toward Walter. "The current authorization is still the one submitted by Ethan Collins over a year ago. He came in today requesting urgent access to funds to cover medical costs for his father. I told him it needed verification because you weren't present. Thankfully, the request hadn't been processed yet." Walter pulled out a large envelope from inside his coat already prepared. "I want to cancel all previous documents and submit new authorization paperwork. This is the original, signed with Attorney Harris 3 days ago. Gabriella Mitchell is now the only person I'm assigning moving forward." Richard flipped through the pages, checking the seals, then looked at me over his thick glasses. "Are you his daughter?" Walter gave a faint, bittersweet smile. "No. She's the only person who doesn't want me dead for my money." I felt a lump in my throat. Richard nodded carefully. "I'll need 2 witnesses confirming his mental soundness at the time of signing." "I have them," Walter said, handing over 2 signed statements from Miss Harris and his private physician, along with cognitive evaluation records all dated within the last 48 hours. Richard signed the receipt, updated the system, and entered my name as the new beneficiary. A confirmation message appeared. "Authorization change successful." Walter exhaled, leaning fully into the chair. "Now my son can afford to be late." I nodded, feeling both relieved and deeply burdened. On our way out of the bank, Walter asked me to stop by a nearby cafe. "I need to rest for a bit," he said, and I need you to see something. When we sat by the window, he handed me an old phone, an outdated model without GPS. I've used it to stay in touch with a few people from the past. No one else knows the number. Following his instructions, I opened the voicemail inbox. The newest message was from a woman, her voice slightly trembling, but every word clear. Walter, it's me. Dr. Mills, I'm the OBGYN who's been seeing Rachel. She just came in and I don't think she's being honest with you. Ethan was with her, and I heard them mention your name. I know I shouldn't be calling, but if you haven't updated your will yet, you might need to know this. Rachel is pregnant. They said the baby would be your only blood heir. I set the phone down, my heart pounding in my chest. Walter took a sip of coffee, calm as if we were just discussing the weather. I don't doubt the baby's real. What I doubt is how they'll use it. You think they'll try to use the baby to overturn the will? I asked, my voice dry. More like to contest the estate once I'm gone. Ethan knows I'm rewriting everything. That baby will be their tool to use blood as leverage. I tightened my grip around the coffee mug. What kind of blood ties do they believe in, if they couldn't even show up when you were sick? Walter gave a bitter chuckle. To them, family is just a mask for whatever they want to take. I leaned back in my chair, eyes drifting toward the street outside, where cars slid past beneath the dim winter sky. The weight pressing against my chest wasn't because of the baby's existence, it was because I had underestimated just how cold they could be. Walter slowly rested his hand on the table and gently tapped mine. Let them come. Let them play every card. And then we'll show them who really holds the deck. We sat together in the living room as dusk settled in, the soft glow of the old lamp casting a quiet golden light across Walter's face. He took a slow sip from a whiskey bottle aged nearly 20 years, the one he once said he was saving for an occasion no one would expect. I poured a little into my own glass, not to drink, just to hold the silence steady between two people who no longer needed to speak. Outside, the rain tapped lightly on the porch roof. Inside, Walter leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed, like he was listening to the years pass through his memory. You know, he finally said, voice thin like smoke. I always thought I'd die quietly. But now, I'm grateful someone's here to see it. I didn't say anything. I just placed my hand over his frail, aging, but still warm. Around midnight, I noticed his breathing had changed. Not strained, not panicked, just gradually softer, lighter, like fog fading into the night. He passed without a single gasp, leaving behind only the faint scent of whiskey in the air and the neatly folded shawl he always draped over the arm of his chair. I didn't cry. I just sat there for a long time, still holding his hand. The next morning, the house felt strangely hollow. I opened the window to let the cold air sweep out the last remnants of a long-kept silence. Then I put on a simple black dress and went about setting everything in place, exactly how Walter had asked, his handwritten letter set neatly on the living room table, tucked under a photo of him from his younger years. A flash drive containing his recorded message placed beside the TV, already plugged in. A thick envelope with copies of the updated will, verification from attorney Judith, medical records, recorded phone calls with Ethan, Rachel, and Linda, sworn statements from neighbors and the nurse, all stamped, labeled, and indexed. I laid it all out on the wooden table, directly under the soft light from the big front window, like a quiet exhibit of honesty betrayed. Near noon, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. A silver SUV rolled into the driveway. The door opened. Ethan stepped out first, sun-kissed face, top two shirt buttons undone like he'd just come from the beach. Rachel followed, her belly slightly visible beneath a loose dress. Linda came last, shopping bags in hand, looking nothing like someone who had just returned from her husband's funeral. I stood in the living room, the light casting long shadows across my back. When the door opened, they all froze. Ethan broke the silence. Gabriella? What are you doing here? And, why are you wearing black? I said nothing, just pointed toward the folded letter resting against the framed photo. Linda stepped forward, her face paling when she saw the dire. The photo no longer showed the family but just Walter, standing in the grass outside a wooden cabin in Vermont. Rachel leaned in to read the letter's heading. I heard her sharp inhale, quiet but undeniable. He's gone? Linda asked, not looking at me but glancing around the room as if something else might confirm what she couldn't accept. He passed last night, I said evenly. Peacefully. None of you were here. Ethan frowned and walked toward the table. What is all this? Everything he wanted to leave behind. Including the truth, I replied, then pressed the remote. The big screen flickered on. Walter appeared, seated in the very chair Linda was now standing beside. His face was calm, eyes looking straight into the camera. I'm Walter Harmon. If you're watching this, it means I've passed. And maybe for the first time in years you'll have to listen to me all the way through. Linda's face stiffened. Rachel stepped back. Ethan stood motionless, not even blinking. Walter recounted every detail: the unexplained withdrawals, the nurses being pressured to lower his medication, the falls no one helped him with. He spoke of the isolation, the manipulation, the erasure from his own life. And finally he spoke about me. The only woman with no blood ties, no legal claim, who treated me like a human being. The video ended with a line that silenced the entire room. So I've decided to leave everything: property, land, bank accounts to Gabriella Mitchell, and a portion to the Golden Voices Foundation, which supports elderly abuse survivors. Ethan, Linda, Rachel, you get nothing. And I will not apologize for that. I turned off the TV. Ethan lunged for the file envelope. I didn't stop him. I just watched him flip through every page, his eyes beginning to glaze over as he saw the notarized signatures, bank records, medical confirmations, and worst of all, the voice recordings of their own conversations I had captured. Rachel began to tremble. This can't be real. We're having a baby. That child is Walter's blood. He has a right. I looked directly at her. That's not enough to overturn a fully notarized will, with witnesses, a video, and confirmed mental clarity. And if you think using an unborn child as legal leverage is your strategy, I already feel sorry for that baby. Linda grabbed the other set of documents. I'll sue. I'll get a lawyer. He was manipulated. Taken advantage of when he was vulnerable. Taken advantage of. I turned to her, never breaking eye contact. You're right. He was. By his own family. The front door opened again. Attorney Judith Harris and her assistant stepped in. She nodded at me, then looked directly at Ethan. I represent Walter Harmon. I'm here to formally execute the will in front of the family. But it seems we don't need much ceremony. In her hand was the final signed will, sealed and notarized, with signatures from 2 physicians and verified footage. Ethan tried to fight back with a few angry words, but Judith calmly presented 2 new documents, a fraud and elder abuse case, already filed with the local court that morning. Rachel was listed as a co-conspirator, charged with providing false information in an attempt to claim the estate. I didn't say another word. I simply stood there, watching 3 people who once believed they controlled everything and now had nothing left but each other. I returned to the house one late afternoon to pack the last of my personal belongings. Sunlight stretched across the wooden floor, filtering through the thin curtains. Walter had once loved because they make everything look lighter, even sadness. The house no longer felt heavy. There were no more arguments, no more footsteps masking indifference behind politeness. Only the quiet breath of someone who had passed, silent but steady. Ethan arrived nearly an hour late. He walked in not like a man reeling from shock, but someone holding back something unsaid. His face looked gaunt, his hair messy like he hadn't slept in days. He stood in the middle of the living room, looking at me, then at the small box on the table where I had left the only 2 things of his I had ever kept. His wedding ring and a silver USB drive. Gabriella, he said, his voice hoarse, whether from the sun or something deeper, I didn't know. I don't have any excuse to ask for your forgiveness. But I really was wrong. I didn't look up. I simply pushed the box toward him gently. Everything's in there, I said. The proof. And the things you should have listened to a long time ago. He sat down across from me. Didn't touch the box. Just looked at it like he was staring at a life being peeled back to the bone. I thought you came for the inheritance, he whispered. Everyone did. Even my mother said she wouldn't stick around if there was nothing left to take. But you stayed. Until the end. You didn't leave. I clenched my hands softly on my lap. You were wrong, I replied. I used to think I stayed because I was compassionate. But in the end, I realized I stayed for myself. Because I needed to know I wasn't useless. I needed to know someone saw me, believed in me, before they closed their eyes. Ethan bowed his head, not in defense but in sheer exhaustion. I don't hate you. I continued. I just don't have anything left to hold on to. He leaned forward slightly, as if to take my hand, but stopped midway. The baby, the child we're expecting, he said softly. You don't have to be part of its life. But if someday it asks why its name wasn't in Walter's will, could you tell the truth? I looked at him for a long moment, then nodded, very slightly. If that child really wants to know, I said, I'll tell them. But not to hurt them. Only so they won't become you. Ethan left after that. He didn't take the box. I didn't remind him. A week later, I left town. The small moving truck carried a few boxes of books, some personal items, an old photo frame, and a copy of Walter's final handwritten letter. I didn't return to the city, nor did I go far. I moved to Utah, a place Walter once mentioned had an abandoned farm with good soil, tall trees, and clean wind. The little house in the field was ivory white, with a gray roof and large windows facing the hills. I bought it at a modest price, using part of what Walter left to fix it up. Every morning I watered the plants. Every afternoon I relearned how to draw, the one thing I used to love when I was a student, before life and marriage pulled me into the spiral of obligations. I opened a small studio behind the house and named it Walter and Grace as a tribute to the two things I believed saved me: a man who looked at me without demand, and a chance to begin again with peace in my heart. My first client was an older widow who asked me to redesign her bedroom into a reading space. She said, I just need a little corner to remember. But not one that traps me in the past. I understood that feeling. On the studio wall, I framed Walter's final letter, pale blue ink, shaky yet clear handwriting. Every morning I glanced at it, a quiet ritual to keep my heart from losing its way. It's not money, but the person who believes in us until the end, that's the most precious thing we leave behind. Those words didn't just remind me of him, they reminded me of myself. Of the days I had forgotten that trust could be chosen again, started again, and given again. It doesn't need blood ties. It doesn't need the perfect moment. It only needs to be real. What do you think of the choice I made? If it were you standing between a love once held and a truth newly revealed, would you forgive, or walk away like I did? I don't consider myself strong. I only know that, at some point, we must choose not between right or wrong, but between continuing to lose ourselves, or finally finding who we are. I chose freedom. Not freedom from others, but from the feeling that I must always prove I'm worthy of love. My story may be coming to a close, but stories like this still unfold every day around kitchen tables, in quiet phone calls, in silent glances across family dinners. If you've been through something similar, or carry thoughts you've never said aloud, share them in the comments. Maybe, just maybe, someone out there needs your story to find their way forward. And if you want to keep hearing real stories about life, family, and the lessons we learn through pain, don't forget to follow this channel. Because sometimes, just one story is enough to change how we see everything.